What's up, all you craft beer fans out there? You have the boys from BeerSighted here, Brandon, Nick, Steve, and Tim, and we are here with our friends from Rolling Hops up in Canada, Garrett and Andy, and we are going to talk about some craft beer myths that we may just try and dispel for you all.
Yeah, so in the craft beer community, there's a lot of myths out there about different styles of beer, how beer is brewed, what it means to be a craft brewery, and that's within the beer community and outside of it. So we really wanted to bring it to you so you can get a better understanding of what's really going on in the craft beer scene. So the first myth we're going to either debunk or tell you is true is IPAs are too hoppy or bitter. So Garrett, I want to throw this over to you and get us started.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nick. So we received this quite a lot, when we're doing our tours, and it's sort of probably the biggest one that we come across just in our day-to-day interactions with some of our guests. And it's one we like to prove or maybe like to try and debunk day-to-day basis, because there's so much to an IPA, and just the fact that you could blanket it with that it's too hoppy or too bitter, it's a little bit vague. So maybe getting right into that aspect of it all, of it being too vague, there are different styles of IPA. If to take two basic examples in the industry today, East Coast style and West Coast style IPAs. Maybe if you're not too familiar with them, you wouldn't know the difference offhand, but if you got to try two of these styles, you'd actually understand that one is a little bit more approachable than the other, i.e. a little less bitter, a little less hoppy. The fact that someone might say that every IPA is just a little too bitter, a little too hoppy, maybe you just got to dive into it a little bit more. And mind you, the novice beer drinker might just slap that overarching title on there. But I believe it be a myth, because there are a lot of different types of IPAs. Craft beer industry these days doing all kinds of crazy things with flavors. So, anything can happen.
Yeah, and Steve, for you, I know early on in your craft beer drinking, it was tough for you to drink IPAs, and I think this was one of the reasons. But I know you've changed a little bit. What made you change, and do you think that that's a barrier for a lot of people?
I'd like to think I have a more refined palate. That's something I've grown with experience in the craft beer industry. But I think you can find plenty of craft beers that are on the too hoppy side of things. I'm sure. I mean, we've all had them. I had one over the weekend it was double dry hop, double IPA. It was like smelt of hops, tasted of hops, bitter as hell. And if you're not into that, you're not into that. But I think for me, it was exactly how Garrett explained it. Like, just as I, moved on from the starter beers that you drink, when you're in college, maybe into the craft beer world, you can find plenty of IPAs. Like a New England IPA is going to be hazy, it's going to be juicy, and you're not just going to taste hops. I mean, there's some IPAs out there you can find that taste like orange juice or like mimosa. Like, it's pretty extreme at some point. So if you're trying to get into it, and that's not even necessarily how I got into it, but just saying that's if that is a barrier for you, I think you can avoid it by just branching out as far as IPAs go, and not having that stereotype in your mind.
Sure. Not to get too deep into the beer weeds, but it also depends a lot on the types of hops that go into making these IPAs, right? I mean, there's a giant range of hops that go into making these beers, and some of them produce more of that citrusy flavor as opposed to the hoppy profile. And then it also kind of depends on some of the other elements in a beer as well. So for example, I'm drinking a triple IPA right now that's brewed with marshmallow, and it's not that hoppy. It's not very it doesn't give you a huge alcohol burn or kick. It's actually very soft, and it has fruit flavors and elements to it, but there's a sweetness to it. So it just kind of depends on what goes into making it, really.
Sure. Many ingredients will vary, and I like what you mentioned about the different hop varieties, because there's such a variance in IPAs, and that's just the category itself. But then if you take like a category of IPAs and switch up the hop varieties within it, permutations are endless. So you can always find something that maybe might be traditionally a little bit more hoppy or a little more bitter. But with craft beer these days, you switch up the hop variety a little bit, and all of a sudden it's a bit more approachable. So I definitely like that aspect and how you brought that up.
Yeah, and one thing I certainly notice is someone who tries a very hoppy IPA for the first time and doesn't like it, it's very hard to get them to branch out and try more IPAs. Where if they started with, say, a New England style or something like Steve was saying, those really juicy IPAs, then maybe they could work their way up. Not that you have to, but that's what I've experienced. I'm a huge IPA fan, but I've seen it where once people try it and they've tried an IPA, that bitterness is in the back of their mind and it never goes away.
Yeah. And I think that a big hop aroma can get to those same people right off the bat. Doesn't always mean it's going to just be a blast of bitterness and hoppiness as it goes down. But a lot of times if you're smelling that right off the bat, then I just feel like somewhere in the brain that's affecting even how you're tasting it and how the whole experience is. So, the aroma is not, don't be fooled by the aroma necessarily. It doesn't mean don't try it, but I think that could probably scare some people off too.
But it resonates, right? When you first smell that overpowering aroma of an IPA and you've tasted it, and maybe that one time you had one that smelled just as strong as it tasted. Yeah. That's not always the case with IPAs, as we've sort of alluded to. Like when we want to bring, let's say, maybe some beer drinkers who keep saying, IPAs are too hoppy or too bitter. And when they come on one of our tours or experiences, we try to showcase things that are sort of that intro, like the East Coast styles, or maybe even session IPAs, right? Because we like to try and break down those barriers of what stereotypes to beer are, because the industry, as you guys know, is huge, and the types of beer in the industry are absolutely vast. So, utilizing some of those, you could probably, we try and turn those, those IPA haters just because they maybe had one bad bitter experience by use of East Coast or session IPAs. So.
Yeah, and Tim, and I know we've talked about this a lot, but in the early days of craft brewing, really all you had was hoppy IPAs, and people were used to really light lagers. Do you just want to touch on kind of not the history of it, but kind of how the really landscape of IPAs has changed?
Well, I think it's craft beer when it first started, like IPAs were what was the go-to to make and to drink. And it was, I kind of feel like it was the craft beer boom started out of the boom of all the mass-made light beers. And so it kind of was people trying to branch out and figure out, this is like, there's a whole nother world here. We don't have to just go with the mass-produced, mass-marketed light beer. I think a IPA that's hoppy and bitter, I think it really offered the most. I'm speculating, but having been somebody that wasn't a huge IPA fan initially, like I think the biggest stark difference between an IPA and one of the mass-produced light lagers is to have that hoppiness and that bitterness. And like the way I describe it, and even still describe it, is IPA that's hoppy, or even a hoppy lager that I've currently found that's currently my favorite beer, is like I feel like I know I'm drinking a beer. Like it's got a bite, it's got a good distinctive taste to it that I think that allows a beer drinker to know that they're drinking that beer. Now, as you said, the history of it, I think as it progressed, people started talking about craft beer, but then the craft beer had to adjust because more people wanted to come into it, but not everyone was quite ready for the beer drinker's beer of a bitter IPA or a hoppy IPA. And I think that's forced a lot of variations. And you have some companies out there. I was just at the liquor store, and Greater Good in Worcester, Massachusetts has like 8, 9, 10 different IPAs on the shelves. So just having that alone really offers a different profile to every beer drinker and allows them to break into or drink their IPA that fits them best. It doesn't always have to be that bitter IPA that people like to create this myth about, and possibly even bar somebody from even trying to break into liking IPAs.
Right. And I think IPAs, I mean, it's when you think about American beer, the first thing you probably think about are like all those light lagers that we've all had a million of, but IPAs are like a super important beer to like the American beer scene in general, North American beer scene in general. It's something that you don't necessarily find, it's not the specialty of like other places around the world. You get the German and Czech lager, light lagers and pilsners, and then some of those Belgian beers. I mean, over there, those are the types of things that they drink, or some of the heavier, darker ales, in the English ales and things like that. But IPAs are huge for North American craft scene, and I feel like that kind of all exploded as one, maybe, and the IPA being like the flagship of it all. I feel like that's something that kind of got shoved in everyone's face. So you had to like that hoppy aspect of it to become a fan, but now you don't necessarily have to just be blasted with hops in order to drink an IPA.
Yeah, and us all being from New England, Andy, I wanted to ask you, do you see the different styles, specifically, I guess, more the East Coast styles like New England IPAs and stuff like that? Do you see that a lot more now in Canada as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the trends are definitely following suit. New like East Coast New England style IPAs are popping up everywhere, and like they're a lot more manageable, if I can use that adjective. But I wanted to ask you gentlemen as well, being a bit of a devil's advocate, what about a purist to the IPA? Like you can adjust the IPA as much as you want, but if you go back into history, if you go back a few hundred years ago, the original IPA would be more similar to your West Coast, really jam-packed with a lot of hops. Obviously, the purpose of it was quite utilitarian, just making the beer more, adding that preservative to keep it fresh for the British Empire, as the British Empire did what they did best, trying to take over the world and needing to ship their beer all over the planet. So is it perhaps a bastardization of the original IPA that we see now in the New England style? Can you look at this as a Puritan lens and say, no, your IPA should be bitter and you should be unapologetic about it?
I think at a time, yeah, it probably was. But I think we've said this a lot, but I really see the landscape changing. And to your point, Andy, they've made it easier for people to drink. And I think that's a huge part of it, is obviously there's always the money aspect, what sells. So you can't just have a super hoppy IPA. I would drink them all day, but then you're only really catering to one person. So I think you're right. The original IPA was bitter. It was hoppy, and that's what it was supposed to be. And it's branched out over the last 50 to 100 years.
Yeah, and as a craft beer fan in general, like I celebrate the fact that there are just so many different ways to make this one type of beer. And yeah, as Nick said, I mean, sales kind of points you in that direction. Like what's popular, what's selling, and that's kind of in the end what the bottom line is. So yeah, I mean, I just enjoy the fact that there's so many different types and styles of beer to try these days.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
So the big question is, are IPAs too hoppy?
I think in this day and age, no. But like Andy, sort of like what Andy said, maybe if you take it back 10, 20 years and like the original IPA style, it'd be like, okay, yes, because they're inherently bitter. But I would say this is debunked, and with the variety in the craft beer industry these days, you can find one that suits a lot of people's needs or preferences at least. I would say no, it's debunked.
What about you boys?
I think that mostly debunks, but the ones that have the real like cult-like following are still going to be too hoppy for most people. Like I think the IPAs that people have, like the Twitter trackers or the special websites or some type of text, like I don't know. I know there's all kinds of different stuff out there for like the cult-like following beers that are hard to get, hard to find, hard to track down. That I think the average person, if they track that down, will drink that hoppy beer and be like, no way. But I think if you went into a liquor store, brewery, wherever you go, and you search out an IPA and are willing to give it more than one shot, I'd say no. But there's an IPA out there for just about everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, I echo that. I think if you're just going based off that original question, are IPAs too hoppy? I would say not all of them. So there are definitely ones that gear more in the other direction. So if you're not into that hoppy flavor, there's definitely something that is for you out there.
Yep, I'm with you. Debunked. Make it all the way around the horn. We all agree. You can try.
Debunk.
There you go. You can try
Debunk.
New England. You can try a session. There's plenty of different styles to try. So Puritans. I'm sorry, as Andy mentioned. But they still make beers for all of us, right?
Oh, that was
Right now the
excellent
Puritans are
history
outnumbered. So
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent history lesson.
Indeed.
Absolutely. You heard it here first. They are not too hoppy. Plenty of styles nowadays. Check out our website. Check out Rolling Hops website for more info about beers and different styles. And we will see you next time. Cheers.